All right, I'm live. Um, I wanted to talk about inflation and also like the way the economy is doing in Canada. There's there's an article I want to pull up. So let me let me do that right now. Um, oh, all right, so this is an article from Spencer Fernando, and it says Trudeau wants to talk about everything except surging inflation. So let me scroll down. And says the Liberals know that if Canadians are focused on the cost of living, they will punish Trudeau at the polls. So this is an article from a month ago. So this was like before the election. So um, it says Justin Trudeau has tried to make this election about a lot of things, demonizing unjabbed Canadians, demonizing law abiding gun owners, mandating jab passports, posturing on climate change, being a feminist, falsely claiming his opponents will privatize healthcare, and on and on and on. Yet, when it comes to the issue that most Canadians are concerned about, and the issue that most impacts us in our day to day lives, Trudeau is virtually silent. That issue would be inflation. Every Canadian has felt the surge in inflation as everything gets more and more expensive. Food prices, in particular, are through the roof, and almost nobody even believes the official inflation rate, as prices seem to be going up much higher. That said, even the government has to admit that inflation is now reaching a level not seen in quite a long time. Here's what Stats Canada said: the Consumer Price Index (CPI) um, rose 4.1% on a year-over-year basis in August, the fastest pace since March 2003, up from a 3.7% gain in July. The increase in prices mainly stems from the accumulation of recent price pressures and from lower price levels in 2020. Excluding gasoline, the CPI rose 3.2% year over year. Of course, excluding would be to ignore the fact that gasoline is up a whopping 32.5% year over year. And as you very well have noticed, meat prices are up dramatically. Year over year, prices for meat products rose at the fastest pace in August, 6.9%, since June 2020, plus 8.1%. Prices for fresh or frozen chicken were up 8.4%, partly based on higher input costs and growing demand from restaurants. Prices for fresh and frozen pork also increased on a year over year basis in August, plus 9.3%, mainly the result of higher input costs and supply chain issues. So, the biggest issue of the campaign, inflation. Inflation and so the biggest issue of the campaign, inflation and the rising cost of living is the biggest issue of the campaign. It most directly impacts all of us, and the consequences continue to grow. We are in effect being robbed of our money beyond the robbery that takes place through the tax system. With inflation this high and with GDP growth weak, we are all getting poorer and poorer in real terms as our hard-earned money is robbed of value. So why wouldn't Justin Trudeau want to talk about this? because the surge in inflation is largely an indictment of his economic record while serving as PM. Trudeau famously said the budget will balance itself, and most recently said he doesn't think about monetary policy. So, oh, yeah, for that he ended up getting a lot of flack from the media and from like other politicians as well. So, because if you're the leader, if you're someone who's running a country, then you have to like think about monetary policy. So, like, I don't know why Trudeau would say something like that. Like he doesn't think about monetary policy. I guess probably shows that he doesn't take his job seriously. So then it says under Trudeau and even before COVID-19, the Liberals had massively expanded the budget deficit, set Canada on a path to structural deficits, expanded the size and scope of government, raised taxes, and put our country in a much more vulnerable situation. Bank of Canada complicity. Adding to the damage of Trudeau's fiscal policies has been the Bank of Canada turning into an increasingly political institution. They have enabled Trudeau's endless spending by keeping interest rates artificially low, making it seem that Trudeau's policies were sustainable since people didn't feel the impact of all the overspending initially. But as we know, you can't keep pumping more and more money into an economy without an increase in productivity, unless you want inflation to be the result. And here we are. Trudeau shifts the political consensus. Unfortunately, in addition to the damage it has done to the economy, Trudeau has shifted the political consensus, albeit artificially. Clearly, many Canadians would be open to spending cuts and more restraint in order to get inflation under control, but no major party is currently advocating those policies. While former CPC finance critic Pierre Poilievre has been a strong voice for policies that would reduce inflation and has done a great job explaining the connection between Justin Trudeau's policies and the surging cost of living, the CPC as a whole hasn't pushed for any drastic change. Note, if the entire CPC message was built around the communication strategy being used by Poilievre, they would be much better positioned for success. And then here's a tweet from Pierre Poilievre. It says, with today's 4.1% inflation numbers, again contradicting the experts in quotation marks, who first told us there would be no inflation and then that it would be transitory, there's a serious question. Were they lying or incompetent? True. It's a good question. And then below there's another tweet he put out. Now might be the worst time to have a prime minister who does not think about inflation. Yeah, this is the video where Trudeau said that he doesn't think about um, monetary policy. Or, so um, let me. I'll play it. I think it's probably a short video. Um,
Do you have a position on the mandate? Would you support a slightly higher tolerance for inflation?
I don't know. When I think about the biggest, most important economic policy this government, if re-elected, would move forward, you'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy.
It's clear we have an inflationary bubble. This government is just trying to pump even more hot air into that bubble. They have created a $1 trillion debt, which means too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. Now, in addition to not having paychecks, Canadians who do work are seeing their paychecks nibbled up by this growing level of inflation. Will this government reverse its inflationary policy, stop spending what it doesn't have, restore fiscal responsibility, and allow Canadians to afford their cost of living?
So yeah, that was Pierre Poilievre. That was him explaining about like what Trudeau's policies are doing, like how it's causing inflation and also deficits as well. So he also mentioned how how Trudeau's policies are also like making like Canadians poorer because because he's saying things like how he doesn't care about he doesn't think about monetary policy and all that, and he also says things like the budget will balance itself, which like no, I don't think anyone believes that. So then it says, and what is clearly a big gap between what the CPC / many CPC MPs want and what the CPC leadership team wants. The Conservatives are proposing to run deficits for another decade, and some projections have them spending even more than the Liberals in the short term, with reductions pushed out to future years. This could be another reason for the PPC surge, as they are now the only party that is really espousing any sense of fiscal conservatism, in addition to mentioning cryptocurrency, one of the ways more and more people are hedging against inflation. Then there's a tweet from Maxime Bernier. It says, many people are asking if I support Bitcoin and cryptos. Of course I do. I hate how central banks are destroying our money and economy. I'm more of an old-fashioned gold and silver fan, but cryptos are another new and innovative way to counter this that should be encouraged. Then it says, additionally, after years of ripping into the Trudeau carbon tax, O'Toole not only introduced his own, but has further muddied the waters by leaving open the possibility of provinces keeping the Trudeau carbon tax in place, even if O'Toole wins. Then it says here, Aaron O'Toole says the Liberals' carbon price won't automatically get scrapped if he's Prime Minister. As the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation pointed out, that is quite a further betrayal of O'Toole's promise to repeal it. And there's the tweet below. I, Aaron O'Toole, promise that if elected Prime Minister of Canada, I will immediately repeal the Trudeau carbon tax and reject any future national carbon tax or cap and trade scheme. So, with the CPC, Liberals, and NDP parties promising, in effect, to bring in policies that could continue to make inflation a problem for the country, why would this surging inflation damage Trudeau the most politically? It's because he's currently in power and because nobody believes he will ever show spending restraint. The CPC still has many fiscal conservatives, but the Liberals do not. At one point, the Liberals could have credibly called themselves a fiscal conservative party, but under Trudeau, that legacy has been wiped away. Well, with COVID now, I don't think they could ever call themselves fiscally conservative. So, Trudeau's answer to everything is to spend more and more. if Canadians go to the polls thinking about inflation and thinking about the cost of living, then Trudeau will pay a heavy electoral price. And unfortunately, Jason Kenney's appalling reversal by announcing on the very same day the new inflation numbers emerged that he's imposing more restrictions and is bringing in a jab passport in Alberta will play into Trudeau's effort to focus attention away from his immense failure on the economy. Well, yeah, and it's not like the media is holding Trudeau to account, as they're not really asking him any like tough questions. So, 'cause, you know, they've been like bought off by the those like bailouts the federal government gave to the mainstream media. So it's not like they're gonna hold him to account or really ask Trudeau any serious questions about like the government spending. So, and that's the end of the article. So, um, yeah, that's the end of the article, and there's also another like article I want to pull up as well. So let me close that. So there's another article I want to pull up. So which is about like the same like subject. So let me pull it up right now. So this is another article from Spencer Fernando, and I suggest you like reading his articles because they're very like they provide like insight as to like to what like the government is doing, and I think he was also like I think he used to like he's also like in politics. I think Spencer Fernando, so I think he has like information about like about how like the government's run and all that, and I don't think he was a politician, but I think he was like a staffer or like someone who works with a politician, like sort of like I think behind the scenes. So he wasn't like exactly a politician, but he's like worked in the political arena before. So like he knows like I think he knows like what's going on like in with like the Canadian government and all. So and he provide in his articles they're very like critical of the government. So I think and also like and I think he understands like how like the whole political system in Canada works as he used to like work in politics, Spencer Fernando. So I suggest like reading his articles as they're very like interesting, and they also like provide insight as to like how the as, as to like how the government is like pretty much just like spending like without balancing the budget, and like how they're like pretty much infringing on Canadians' rights. So here it says Poilievre's ad on the economy is the message Canadians need to hear. Well, a mix of realism and optimism, with an explanation of how deficit spending hurts regular Canadians by making everything more expensive. And there's a picture there saying "Made in Canada, 100% quality." In a recent article, Aaron Where declares the balanced budget error, but Wary also points out no party is going into the next. Why I mention this? Because as a state broadcaster, CBC telegraphs the message that Trudeau and the government pushes, and declaring an end to balanced budgets is that message. That said, Weary isn't wrong in his assessment of what the main parties are proposing. While Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh have of course abandoned balanced budgets, even the CPC under Aaron O'Toole has moved to a more left-wing position, with O'Toole saying the CPC won't balance the budget for another 10 years. Well, that means like more like spending and more like more spending and more deficits and yeah, and also means and yeah, and because they're like they're they're running on deficits, like the government, they're just borrowing like more money like from the future, so they're basically just spending like money that they don't have. So because they're in debt, they're just like they're basically just spending money that they don't have with by like borrowing more money from the future, and the Bank of Canada is just like helping them do that. So then it says any promise to do something over 10 years is close to meaningless, since that would assume you are getting re-elected over and over again, which can never be guaranteed. As a result, there's a consensus among Trudeau, O'Toole, and Singh on not balancing the budget, which is a disturbing occurrence for Canadians who value fiscal responsibility. Yeah, it also means that Canadians are going to become more poor. They're not going to get any. They're not going to be making more money as with all this like deficit spending and these politicians and the parties, they don't seem to care all that much, because they're not the ones who will have to pay for all like all the debt accumulated. It's going to be like regular Canadians will have to pay for all the wasteful spending by the government, and also it's not only the federal government that's like spending, that's running deficits. It's also the provincial government. They're also like on they're also in debt as well. So they're spending money that they don't have as well. So same thing here, where they're just borrowing more money from the future. So yeah, it's not only like a federal government problem, but even the provincial government is doing that too. So, and it's regular Canadians who are gonna suffer from this, as they have to pay for all the debt like accumulated from wasteful spending from the government. So then it says in the inflation tax, it's important to note how things have changed in Canada since it's important to note how things have changed in Canada and why getting to a balanced budget is so important. Under the COVID pandemic, talk of running deficits was about deficits in the range of 10 to 20 billion dollars. As a percentage of the economy, those aren't huge and don't have a huge distorting impact on the economy. But the Liberals have, after running gigantic deficits for a year due to understandable circumstances, sought to entrench a much higher level of spending. We are talking deficits above $150 billion, with the Liberals bringing in roughly $100 billion in permanent new spending. That's a lot of money. Money that they don't have, by the way, as they're in debt, and so they're running deficits. So basically, they're just borrowing like money from the banks. So because they don't have like they don't actually have any money, so they're just borrowing like more money from the bank for all these like spending projects. So they are taking the opportunity to reset spending levels at a much higher rate. This has been financed by historic levels of money creation by the Bank of Canada, with interest rates being artificially kept low to enable a huge expansion of government. It is, of course, no surprise then that inflation has gone up dramatically, with already struggling Canadians facing a higher and higher cost of living. Government loves that since they get credit on the one hand for all the new support for people, while the actual value of that support erodes due to the deep declining value of money. Inflation is the hidden tax that governments use to get away with robbing the people, and they enjoy it since it makes it hard for many people to see the robbery as it happens. So yeah, this is like so this is like another example of the government like stealing people's money. So and people talk about how like taxation is like a way like governments steal money from people. Well, this is also another way, except this way, except with this, they don't even have to go into your like wallet. They don't even have to go into your wallet to steal your money. They can they can steal it by like by devaluing the value of your money. So which is what they're doing by printing like more and more like money from the banks to like make up for all this to help them with their spending. So like with all so they're actually like devaluing the currency by with all this like printing they're doing. So Polyev, a rare politician who talks about this in detail. Many politicians, most of them, don't talk much about inflation, especially lately. The Liberals and NDP clearly want to use inflation to get away with a huge expansion of the state, and the CPC seems unsure about their message, going back and forth between criticizing the Liberals for higher deficits while also promising not to cut anything. You obviously can't have it both ways. If $100 billion in permanent new spending is too much, that means you have to cut. If it's not a problem, then why criticize the Liberals for it? This incoherent message is a key reason for why the CPC is struggling. Many conservatives feel they don't have a consistent message to promote, and opponents can simply read the words into what the CPC claims. One of the few CPC politicians to push back against this is Pierre Poilievre. The former CPC finance critic has long been talking about the danger of overspending. Has been explaining the link between large budget deficits and the rising cost of living. His message has at times been different from the CPC under O'Toole, in large part due to the fact that it is consistent and is actually conservative. And Poilievre's latest ad, in which he encapsulates many of his key messages in 30 seconds, is worth noting. But it says the video is unavailable, so I can't watch it. Then it says there are a few interesting things here. First, it shows that you can get across important concepts in a short period of time, something the CPC has struggled to do. Polyev links things people are seeing all around them: higher prices for homes, gasoline, food, and more, to the policies of Justin Trudeau. He also explains inflation effectively as more spending leads to a decline in the value of our money, meaning people are, in real terms, getting poorer. Yeah, like they're basically just, yeah, it's like the government's basically just stealing people's money, except this time they don't even have to go into your wallet to like steal it. They're doing it by like devaluing the currency or like the value of the money. So which means that like the money you have, it has like less value than it had before. So then it says and then Polyev effectively avoids a mistake many fiscal conservatives make. Often it's easy to come across as depressing or draconian, but when we talk about fiscal responsibility, but Polyev points out how this can be an optimistic way of thinking because getting spending and debt under control creates more opportunity for the creation of real wealth and real jobs. He also throws in some made in Canada economic nationalism, an agenda that has worked well for conservatives across the Western world. Interesting political analysis. So, so from the content side of things, Polyev's message is effective, and when we do a political analysis of it, some interesting themes also emerge. First, note how First, note how the ad doesn't say anything about the CPC national brand or Aaron O'Toole. I don't interpret that as an attack on O'Toole. However, it does show that there is an effort to emphasize Polyev's personal brand. That is not a surprise, considering that the CPC itself and center-right ideas are polling much higher than O'Toole does. If MPs behind the scenes are seeing horrific poll numbers, and if O'Toole continues to languish as an unpopular figure, those MPs will have to do what is necessary to protect themselves in an upcoming election. As you can see, the Polyev ad is from the Carleton Conservative Association, not the CPC itself. I would expect to see more of this, not only from Polyev, but also from other MPs who have their own strong personal brands. This is also interesting for the long term of the CPC, as we are seeing some ideological contours of what could be a future CPC leadership race. That aside, the CPC would benefit mightily from fully embracing the message Polyev is sharing in his ad, because it's a message Canadians need to see and hear. So it's the ad up here it's talking about, but it says the video is unavailable. We cannot allow a far left economic consensus to entrench itself at the federal level and support those like. We cannot allow a far left economic consensus to entrench itself at the federal level and support those like Polyev who are pushing back is key to preserving fiscal responsibility in Canada. Yeah. So with COVID, like government, they pretty much abandoned like all fiscal responsibility as they just want to like increase the debt and yeah, and they're just running on deficits right now as they're borrowing like money from the banks to like help with their spending, so they're like spending money that they don't actually have. So they don't seem to be concerned about it because they're not the ones who will have to pay for it, but regular Canadians will have to pay for it. So yeah, and like the economy in Canada has been like struggling for quite some time. So like even before COVID, like before 2020, like the economy in Canada has been, we had in like Canada had like the highest unemployment rate like in the G7. So out of like all the other countries in the G7, like France, Germany, United States, and I think Japan and Italy, like Canada has had like out of all those countries, like Canada has had like the highest unemployment rate in the G7 because of, well, not because of COVID, but because of like bad government policies. And so, and now with COVID, like it's only gone worse with all the lockdowns and restrictions as you know, many businesses are just staying afloat, or they're struggling with the lockdown. So, and now with all this like debt, and with like the debt, and with all the spending from like both federal and provincial governments, like many Canadians are gonna end up being poorer. They're not gonna like get they're not gonna get richer, but many will end up getting poorer as like the as like the value of their money is like just dropping. So if you want to know why, like if you want to know why like prices are why everything's becoming unaffordable and expensive in Canada, it's because like well, maybe maybe it's because prices are increasing, but it's mainly due to like the value of the dollar dropping. So if you want to know why everything's becoming unaffordable these days, like it's because like the value of the dollar it's because the value of the dollar is like is decreasing, so which is like causing um yeah, so that's why like something will like maybe something you want to buy like because affordable for you like one day, and then the next day it's not, like you aren't able to afford it. So that's because like because of the because of like the because of like the devaluation of the currency, which is making everything unaffordable. So, and I don't know if like many Canadians like are aware of this, or if they even care about it. But yeah, I just had to point that out. As like media, they're not really talking about this. So yeah, that's like what I wanted to talk about. So like I hope like people understand that like higher deficits isn't a good thing, especially for regular Canadians, as it means they'll be like worse off, as they'll have to pay for all the debt accumulated by all the wasteful government spending. So yeah, so yeah, that's everything I want to talk about. So yeah, gonna sign off now.